In order for us to appreciate today's daf, I just wanted to point out that we've been talking about two types of birds. So this daf this whole parak has been for the birds. And the next parak will be as well. Yeah, it is Hishkakian when you feel that you're being attacked and under pressure from the birds. Okay, the two bird offerings that we're talking about are the Chatas Ha'of and the Olas Ha'of. And we've noted a number of differences between the Chatas Ha'of and the Olas Ha'of. One of the differences that I neglected to mention because I didn't really catch it so well is that there's another important difference, that the Chatas Ha'of has two types of blood work. One is Haza'ah, where you flick the bird's body and sprinkle its blood on the side of the altar. And the second blood work is Mitzui, is pressing the body of the bird itself against the altar, and through the applied pressure, blood squeezes out of the arteries onto the side of the altar. With the Olas Ha'of, the blood work is only Mitzui, and there's no Haza'ah. And that's why we said that it seems like, according to everybody, if you don't do the Mitzui, since there's no other blood work to be done by the Olas Ha'of, then it's puzzle. You got to do some blood work. Okay, so I want to get that straight. I also want to clarify that for the Olas Ha'of, as we know, like every Ola, it's completely burnt on the Mizbeach. And for the Chatas bird, once you've done the Mitzui, you actually now give the whole bird to the Kohen, and it's his for consumption. Okay? There's no part of the bird that, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, there's no part of the Chatas bird that goes on the Mizbeach. Okay?
That's two words. The first one is the
Mitzui is the pressing of the bird. Squishing it. Okay, to use the technical term, squishing. Yes. And what was the second word you wanted?
The first one was the application.
Haza'ah. Sprinkling. Okay. Now, Tanurab, so Mitzah Dam Haguf, going back to our discussion of the Olas Ha'of, we had said that, remember, one of the major differences that we've been talking about until now is that with the Chatas Ha'of, you only sever one siman, you don't sever two simanim, and therefore the head and the body of the bird still remain attached after malika. We could call that sort of like a half malika, and that's kosher, that kills the bird. With Ola, it's a full malika, and therefore the head and the body are severed from each other. The Mishnah had stated that when you sever the head and the body, you do mitzui with both the head and with the body. You press both of them with the bloody part facing the wall against the mizbeach to let the blood run out of both of them. If, however, you didn't do a mitzui on the head and you only did mitzui on the guf, b'di'evet it's kosher. But if you only did mitzui on the head and you didn't do mitzui on the guf, so then it's pasul. Okay? So mitzui on the guf is the vital part. Mitzui on the head is lechatchila, but not b'di'evet. So the Gemara now says, Tana Rabbanan Oila, Afal Pi Shemitza Dam Haguf Lo Mitza Dam Harosh. So we're referring up to a pasuk in Perek Aleph pasuk Yud Zayin, where the Torah says that it's the Ola, and that word Ola teaches me Olahu. It is an Ola. So what is the Ola? It refers to the body of the bird and not the head. So therefore, if you did mitzui only with the body and not with the head, it's b'di'evet your yotze. Yochol afal pi shemitza dam harosh v'lo mitza dam haguf. You might think that that's reversible as well, that if you only pressed with the head but not with the body, that would also b'di'evet be okay. Talmud lomar hu. So the Torah says olahu. So hu is a miyut, and it's coming to tell you, no, it's dafka got to be the head it's dafka got to be the body and not the head. My Talmuda, where do you see from that word hu that it's excluding the head and not the body and not vice versa? Amaravina mistavra rov damim beguf shchichi. If the Torah is limiting it in some way, that it absolutely requires some blood to be pressed from one of the two pieces, it makes more sense that it's requiring the body to be pressed and not the head, because most of the blood, that is the life force of the bird, is in the body and not in the head. Okay? So, Hadron Alach Kodshe Kodshe. That concludes. We will come back to you, Mirz Hashem, Kodshe Kodshe. Let's go on to the new parak, 7th parak of Zevachim, Chatas Ha'of. Sha'asa lamata kemaisa chatas l'shem chatas keshera. So the first line of the Mishnah is somewhat unnecessary, because it's basically telling me that if I do the chatas ha'of according to its protocol, it's kosher. So obviously it's there to teach me that we're going to contrast that in a second. But if you notice, you did it. There are 3 things that it lists that you did according to correct protocol. The blood work you did below the chut, that's where the chatas ha'of's blood is supposed to be. You did it kemaisa chatas, which presumably means you did the malika in the way that you're supposed to do a chatas's malika, which is called the half malika, and l'shem chatas, and you did it with the intent that it should be a korban chatas. So since you got those 3 protocols correct, it's totally kosher. Now, kemaisa chatas l'shem ola, but let's say when you did it, you had in mind to do it for the ola, but you did everything according to the chatas protocol. Or kemaisa ola l'shem chatas, or let's say you did the ola protocol, such as doing a full malika instead of half a malika, and nonetheless you did it l'shem chatas, kemaisa ola l'shem ola. Or if you did both the protocol and the intent for the sake of an ola, when this was pre-designated as a chatas bird, it's psula. And it's totally puzzle. Just like any korban chatas that is shalol lishma, the korban is puzzle. That's the first Mishnah in Zevachim, right? Any chatas that's done shalol lishma is puzzle. Now, asa lamayla kemasa kulan pisula. And if you did the blood work of this chatas above the chut, instead of going below the chut, then regardless of what other intentions and actions you did, the korban is puzzle. Fine. Next. Ola sa'of. Now up until now we've been talking about the chatas. Now let's talk about the ola. So sha'asa l'mayla k'maisa ola l'shem ola k'shera. If you got the 3 protocols correct, the thing is kosher. So you did the blood work above, which is the correct place. You did the protocol, the action of an ola, which presumably refers to the malika, where you completely severed the head from the body, and you did it for the sake of an ola. So you got the 3 protocols correct, and therefore it's kosher. But kemase ola l'shem chatas keshera, uvilvad shelo also liva aleha. If, however, you did everything according to the protocols of an ola, but you did it shalol lishma, you did it for the sake of a chatas. So what's the standard halacha in the first parak of Zevachim? That an ola that is done shalol lishma is kosher. Therefore, you can put it on the mizbeach, but it's not ola l'shem va'olav. The person who brought it has to bring another replacement bird. Next, kemase chatas l'shem ola, or kemase chatas l'shem chatas pesula. If you did the protocol like a chatas, but you did it l'shem ola, in other words, I'm doing it for the sake of an ola, but the protocol that I'm doing is I'm severing the head entirely instead of doing I'm only doing a half malika instead of a full malika, which I'm supposed to do a full malika for the ola, and I end up doing only a half malika. Or if I do a half malika for the sake of chatas, so then it's puzzle. Because our Tana holds over here that doing a half malika when you're supposed to do a full malika is totally puzzle. Now we saw an opinion yesterday that doing a half malika might be considered okay according to some opinions. But this Tana holds that doing a half malika when you're supposed to do a whole malika is clearly not okay. Asa'a lamata kemasa kulan pisula. And finally, if you do the blood work of the ola below the chut instead of above the chut, regardless of what other protocols you did fulfill l'shem ola, nonetheless, it is going to be possible, because the blood work is the primary issue. Okay, now let's take a look at our Gemara. Deshani b'mai. Now, we're going on the ola right now. Rashi says, Akemasa ola l'shem chatas koi. I'm sorry, we're talking about the chatas, which is the first part of our Mishnah. You took a bird that was designated as a chatas, and you did the protocol of an ola on it, and you had in mind l'shem chatas. Deshani b'mai, what protocol did you change in the action that you did on this bird? Ilema deshani b'malika, if you're going to tell me that you did the malika differently, instead of doing a half malika, you did a full malika, and that's what we presumed was to be the case. Nema delo Rabbi Elazar b'Reb Shimon, da'amar shamati shemavdilin b'chatas ha'of. It seems like, therefore, our Mishnah cannot go like Rabbi Elazar b'Reb Shimon, because Rabbi Elazar b'Reb Shimon said that even if you cut off the whole head for a chatas bird, it's still kosher, even though the Torah says only do a half malika. Remember, in yesterday's daf, we learned what does that mean? That you don't have to completely sever the head. But if you want to, you could. That's a Rabbi Elazar b'Reb Shimon shita. But the Tanakama, the Chachamim, argue with that. So our Mishnah is consistently arguing with Rabbi Elazar b'Reb Shimon, and therefore our Mishnah can't go like him. So the Gemara says, what's the big deal? V'lo kimna delok Rabbi Elazar b'Reb Shimon? We established that yesterday, that the previous Mishnah also was not going like Rabbi Elazar b'Reb Shimon, because it had told us that if you do a full malika on the chatas bird, it's going to be pasul. So why are you so up in arms that our Mishnah doesn't go like Rabbi Elazar b'Reb Shimon? So the Gemara says, lo, because perhaps you could explain it a different way. You might be able to explain our Mishnah such that it does not get involved in the machlokas between Rabbi Elazar b'Reb Shimon and the Chachamim regarding malika, but rather the word masei ola means something else. Deshani bahazah. That what you did is that you took the chatas bird, and instead of doing haza'ah and mitzoi, you only did mitzoi. In other words, a chatas has to have haza'ah, and then you do mitzoi. But you treated it like an ola bird, and you only did mitzoi. And that's maybe what the Mishnah means to say, that if you do that, it's pasul. And it's not getting into the issue of malika. Hachinami mistavra. And the Gemara says, I can even argue that logically based on the flow of the Mishnah. Because midikatani seifa asa'a l'mayla kemasa kulan pesula. Va'afilu kemaisa chatas l'shem chatas. And because the Mishnah says in the next statement, it says that if you did it, if you did the work above, then it doesn't matter what else you did correctly for the chatas, but if you did it above, then it's going to be pasul. Now, deshani b'mai, what did you do above? Ilema deshani b'malika, if you did the malika while standing on the higher part of the mizbeach instead of standing on the lower part of the mizbeach, ha'amar mar malika b'chol makom b'mizbeach kishera. It can't be talking about malika over there when it talks about doing it above. It can't be referring to malika, because malika is kosher for any animal, for any bird, rather, regardless of where you're standing, whether up or down. So elalav deshani bahazah, umideseifa bahazah reishanami bahazah. So therefore, we must conclude that when it says that if you did it above, it refers to the blood work. You did the blood work above for the chatas bird instead of doing it below the chut, and therefore it's going to be pasul. Well, if we're talking about blood work, in the next line of the Mishnah, it follows that we're talking about blood work in the first line of the Mishnah. And the first line of the Mishnah that says that instead of doing the chatas bird, its blood work like a chatas, you did its blood work like an ola by just doing mitzoi instead of doing haza'ah and then mitzoi. So maybe that's what the Mishnah means, and it's got nothing to do with malika. So the Gemara says, midi irya hakideisa v'hakideisa. The Gemara says, I don't favor that argument. Because many times you could have a Mishnah which addresses one topic in the Reisha and another topic in the Seifa. So therefore, just because if we're talking about in the second part of our Mishnah doing something above the chut, doesn't mean doesn't just because that's referring to the blood work doesn't automatically imply that the first case was talking about blood work. The first case could have been talking about malika. And that, therefore, says the Gemara, is the more favorable way of learning the Mishnah. That seems, as you'll see, seems to be the maskana of the Gemara, that our Gemara is not like Rabbi Elazar b'Reb Shimon, and the statement of the Mishnah is that if you completely sever the head because you did a full malika when you were only supposed to do a half malika, you've rendered the carbon pasul. Okay, next, olas ha'of. So that concludes our discussion about the chatas, and let's talk about the olas ha'of. Deshani b'mai. Remember, we had the same conversation. And by the Ola, it said that if you change the action that's normally done to the Ola instead do the action of a Chatas, what did we say? We said that that is going to render it pasul. So what did you change? Ilema deshani b'malika, if you'll tell me that instead of cutting off the whole head, you only did a half malika. So medikatani seifa kulan ein metamin beveis hablia umaolin bahen nema delo kerebi Yehoshua. So 1 second. We're going to see a Mishnah in just a few lines. Just in the next few lines, we're going to start a new Mishnah. And in that next Mishnah, the Mishnah is going to say that in all situations where you did a partial or full malika, but you did it incorrectly, that malika is sufficient to render this animal a non-nevela, so that it doesn't make you tameh if you swallow it, if you eat it, which is normally the halacha. If you swallow a nevela bird, your whole body becomes tameh. But if you did a malika, but you did an incorrect malika, it doesn't make you tameh because the bird is not a nevela. It was killed correctly, but just not in the correct protocol for that particular carbon. And furthermore, it is subject to me'ila. It is subject to me'ila. Now, why is it subject to me'ila? Because since you botched the carbon and you rendered it pasul, this item cannot be eaten by the Kohanim. And since it cannot be eaten by the Kohanim, even if it's a Chatas bird, normally a Chatas bird is eaten completely by the Kohanim. But since you took a Chatas bird and you did the protocol of an Ola, or you took an Ola bird, which is always totally burnt and never eaten, so anything that cannot be eaten by human beings is subject to Me'ila. So when you botch the carbon, you render it pasul, and it cannot be eaten by anybody, so it's subject to Me'ila. So Nema delo Rebbe Yehoshua. So if you're telling me that you botched it by doing the malika incorrectly, so this seems to go not like Rebbe Yehoshua, which is the next opinion that's cited in our Mishnah in a few lines. De'ika Rebbe Yehoshua ha'amar ein mo'alin. Rebbe Yehoshua is going to say a very interesting halacha. He's going to say that if you take an Ola bird, we're going to see this in a few lines. If you take an Ola bird and you do everything according to the protocols of a chatas, which means you sprinkle the blood below the chut, and you do it l'shem chatas, and you do a half malika instead of a whole malika, Rabbi Yehoshua says it is not subject to me'ila anymore because it is now edible to the Kohanim. He says that from some magical, bizarre reason, that if I take a bird that was designated as an Ola, and I do everything to it according to the protocols of a chatas, this animal is no longer subject to me'ila. It's now kosher for to be eaten by the Kohanim. Now, according to what you're telling me, in our Mishnah over here, it had said that if you change the malika of an Ola bird and you change the malika to chatas, then the thing is totally pasul. So how could it not be subject to me'ila? It must be that this line in our Mishnah is not going like Rebbe Yehoshua. So the Gemara says, ve'ela b'mitzvah. So what's the alternative? Maybe you could explain our Mishnah is not talking about malika over here. It's talking about mitzvah. And it's basically saying that instead of doing the protocol that you were supposed to do to an Ola bird by just pressing against the wall, you instead did only haza'ah. And you sprinkled the blood instead of doing mitzvah. Maybe that's what is meant over here. So, Ema Seifa. Olas ha'ov sha'asa lamata kemase chatas l'shem chatas, Rabbi Eliezer omer mo'olin ba, Rabbi Yeshua omer ein mo'olin ba. Now, if you take a look at the next part of the next Mishnah, it says that if you did an Ola, and instead of doing it above the chut, you did whatever you're supposed to do below the chut, like a chatas, Rabbi Eliezer says it is subject to me'ila because it's totally pasul, and Rabbi Yeshua says it's edible to the Kohanim and therefore it's not subject to me'ila. Deshani b'mai. Now, what did you change? Ilema b'mitzoi. If you're going to tell me that you did hazah instead of mitzoi for this Ola bird, Amar da'amar Rabbi Yeshua deshani b'malika b'mitzoi mi'amar. All I know, according to Rabbi Yehoshua, is that if you change the malika process, the bird is still edible to the Kohanim. But mitzoi is something that is so vital to the affectation of the carbon that you never see that Rabbi Yehoshua would hold that way. That if you totally disregarded mitzvah that's supposed to be done to an Ola bird, then the animal is still not subject to Meila. We don't have any evidence that Rabbi Yoshua would subscribe to that. So you must say, ve'ela b'malika. You must say that the only discussion in the later Mishnah is regarding when you did the malika differently. You did the malika for the sake of a chatas instead of what it's designated for, which is an ola. So therefore you only did half malika. There, Rabbi Yoshua says, since you did everything for the sake of a chatas, plus you did the mitzoi, so then the halacha will be that it's not subject to me'ilah, the kohanim can eat it. But we never, so that must be the conclusion. And therefore the Gemara's problem is, reisha v'seifa b'maliko mitziyasa b'mitzoi, question mark? So then it turns out that the first part of our Mishnah, which was talking about the chatos bird, is talking about when you do the malika incorrectly. The last part of the Mishnah, which is our next Mishnah, is talking about where you do the malika incorrectly. And here you're suggesting that over here what's being done differently is not the malika, but rather is the mitzoi, because otherwise this middle part is not consistent with Rabbi Yehoshua's shita. So is that what you're going to suggest? We're changing topics from first talking about malika, then talking about mitzoi, and then talking about malika once again. Isn't that a little bit contrived? The Gemara says in reisha v'seifa b'maliko mitziyasa b'mitzoi. Well, that's what we're going to have to conclude. In order to make sense out of the structure of the Mishnah, we're going to have to conclude that even though it's a little bit of a contrivance, but we're going to have to go with it. And then at the end of the day, it's the only way that you can make sense of the Mishnah in order for it to be consistent with both Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehoshua. So I know that this is a little bit confusing because we haven't yet even seen that Mishnah. Now let's take a look at the Mishnah and you'll get a better understanding. V'kulon ein metamein beveis habliya umoalin bahen chutz mechatas ha'of she'asa lamata k'masei chatas l'shem chatas. Now, in all situations where you do the malika and you do the avoda, if you were to swallow a piece of the bird's flesh, that bird is not considered nevela, even if the malika was done incorrectly, and therefore it does not render you tameh. But it is still subject to me'ilah if you did an incorrect avoda, because let's speak it out. If we're talking about a chatas bird and you did the avoda incorrectly to make it pasul, so then the kohanim will not be able to eat that bird, and therefore it's subject to me'ilah. It's therefore subject to me'ilah because they can't eat it. And for an ola sa'of, then even when you do it correctly, it's subject to me'ilah because no part of that bird can be eaten by human beings, and therefore it's subject to me'ilah. Chutz, one second. Chutz mechata sa'of sha'asa lamata k'masei chatas l'shem chatas. Except if you do the chatas bird totally correctly. If you do the chatas bird totally correctly, which means you did its blood, you did the malika halfway, you did the blood work correctly below the chut, and you did it l'shem chatas. So since you did all the protocols correctly, then since that bird is now edible to the kohanim, it is no longer subject to me'ilah. Go ahead, Bob.
In this situation, when you talk about that the bird is subject to me'ilah, what is the practical significance? The kohen has to pay a fine?
Anyone who gets personal benefit from that bird has committed a sin called me'ilah, and he has to bring a korban, and he has to pay back the temple.
But what do you do with that bird now that's subject to me'ilah? You can't do anything with it.
Well, anytime something is subject to me'ilah, the question is why. Either because it has to be burned on the altar, or it's usher to be eaten because it's pasul and it has to be incinerated. But if a person gets personal benefit from it, he has violated that law.
So you get rid of it one way.
You have to dispose of it, but
it could be.
Next. So that covers when a chatas ha'of is subject to me'ilah, when it's not subject to me'ilah. Olas ha'of sha'asa lamata k'masei chatas l'shem chatas. But here's an unusual phenomenon that we made reference to just a moment ago. If I do the olas ha'of incorrectly, and I do it completely according to the protocols and the intentions of a chatas, so I do the blood work, I do a full malika, I do a half malika, and I do the blood work below the chut, and I do it l'shem chatas. So Rabbi Eliezer Omer mo'alim ba. Rabbi Eliezer says it's totally pasul. The kohanim can't partake of it, so it's subject to me'ilah. But Rabbi Yeshua Omer ein mo'alim ba. And Rabbi Yeshua says no. magically, in some bizarre fashion that the Gemara will have to explain tomorrow, if I take a bird designated as an ola, and I do everything with it, l'shem chatas, and according to the protocols of chatas, it is converted for some, at least for some purpose, for the edibility to the Kohanim as a chatas bird, and the Kohanim are now allowed to eat that bird. Which doesn't really make much sense, because we don't have that phenomenon by any other kind of korban that's done shelo lishma. So Amar Rabbi Eliezer, Uma im chatas she'ein mo'alin ba lishma kishashina shma mo'alin ba, ola shemo'alin ba lishma kishashina shma inodin she'imalu ba. So Rabbi Eliezer in the Mishnah challenges Rabbi Shua. He says logic dictates just the contrary. He says, look at a chatas. If I take a bird designated as a chatas and I do it completely for the sake of an ola, if I had done the chatas correctly, it would not be subject to me'ilah. But because I did it incorrectly, it is subject to me'ilah. So surely an ola bird, when I do it correctly, it's still subject to me'ilah, because it has to be totally burnt. Then surely when I do it incorrectly, it should be subject to me'ilah. So Amarle Rabbi Yeshua lo. So Rabbi Yeshua says, no, you got that wrong. Im amarta b'chata sheshina es shema l'shem ola, shekain shina es shema l'davar sheyesh bo me'ilah. Tomar ba'ola sheshina shema l'shem chatas, shekain shina es shema l'davar she'ein bo me'ilah. So Rabbi Yeshua says, I'm sorry, but that analogy is not apt. Your logic is flawed. He says, when you take a chatas bird, and you do it for the sake of an ola, and you do using the protocols of an ola, you're changing it into a type of bird where if it was that bird, it would always be subject to me'ilah, because an ola has to be totally burnt. But over here, when you take an ola bird and you do it according to the protocols of a chatas, you're transferring it into a type of bird which is not subject to me'ilah. And that's why I hold that taka, if you change the ola into completely chatas in the way that you think about it, in the way that you do the protocol for it, taka is not subject to me'ilah anymore. So Amar Rabbi Eliezer, v'harei kodshe kodshim sheshachtan b'darm v'shachtan l'shem kodshim kalam yochichu. He says, Rabbi Eliezer says, I'm still not happy with that argument. He says, let me take an analogy from the animal sacrifices law. Right? When you take an animal that was designated as kodshe kodshim, let's say a korban ola, it has to be shechted in the north, and it has certain limitations. If you go ahead and you treat that animal now as a shlomim, which is kodshim kalim, and instead of slaughtering it in the north, you slaughter it somewhere else, right? Shekain shina eshamam l'davar she'ein bo me'ilah. So you've transferred it into something where a shlomim, for example, is not subject to me'ilah because it's edible. So, and yet you still say that what? U'mo'alin bahen. But it's still subject to me'ilah because you've pasaled the korban. You've pasaled the korban ola. In other words, even though shelo lishma, it's still kosher, but it still has to be completely burnt. You're not allowed to eat it. It's still subject to me'ilah. So af atal tisma la'ola afal pi sheshina shma l'davar she'ein bo me'ilah she'imalu ba. So why don't you say the same thing by an ola bird, that you change it and try to make it into a chatas bird? It should still be subject to me'ilah. So Amar lo Rabbi Yoshua lo. Im amarta b'kodshe kodshim sheshachtan b'darm v'shachtan l'shem kodshim kalim shekain shina eshamam l'davar sheyesh bo iser v'heter tomar ba'ola sheshina eshamam l'davar shekulo heter. So Rabbi Yeshua comes back with the following response. Again, your logic is flawed. It's not an apt analogy. When I take an ola animal and I do it according to the protocols of a shlomim, even according to my new intent that this should be a shlomim, I am turning it into an animal, to a type of korban, where at least some of that animal tissue is destined for the mizbeach. Because when I have a shlomim animal, I can't eat the entrails. The entrails have to be placed on the mizbeach. I'm only allowed to eat the meat of that animal. So therefore, since I've changed it from an ola, kodshe kodshim, and I've changed it now into a shlomim, where some of the animal has to be placed on the mizbeach and is still subject to me'ilah, therefore I say the entirety of the animal is subject to me'ilah because it started off as an ola. But by the bird, it started off as an ola, and I changed it completely into a chatas in my actions, in my approach to it. If this truly was a chatas, not just a portion of the animal, of the bird, would be edible to the Kohanim, but the entire bird is edible to the Kohanim. as we learned in the Mishnah on Daf Samach Dalet Amud Beis, that when after you do the malika on a chatas bird, what's the protocol? You do hazah, you do mitzoi, and then what? You take this carcass and you give it to the kohanim, and they eat it entirely. There is nothing that is placed on the mizbeach by a chatas ha'of. And as a result, it's totally different from changing an ola to a shlamim by an animal versus changing an ola bird to a chatas bird, because you're changing it into a type of bird which is totally consumed by the kohanim, none of which is subject to me'ilah. And that's why I hold that when I take a bird designated as an ola and I treat it completely like a chatas, it's not subject to me'ilah. We still don't understand the mechanics of it, why it should work when in all other situations, when you change something from its designated status, it's not supposed to work anymore, and it should still be subject to me'ilah. We still have to understand where Rabbi Yeshua gets this from. We'll see he gets it from Psukim ostensibly, and we'll learn about that in Mirz Hashem tomorrow. Have a great day.